In a decision that will reverberate through the global economy, the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump-era tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other goods. For nearly a decade, these tariffs reshaped supply chains, raised consumer prices, and strained U.S. alliances. The court's ruling marks a fundamental shift in the balance of power between the president and Congress on trade. The tariffs, first imposed in 2018 under a rarely used 1962 law, bypassed Congress by invoking national security. Today's decision sets a new legal precedent, limiting executive power in trade for a generation. The ruling follows years of legal challenges from importers, foreign governments, and manufacturers who argued the tariffs were economic protectionism, not true national security. The Supreme Court's verdict dismantles a trade framework that has dominated U.S. economic policy for 8 years. It forces a complete reevaluation of American trade strategy, with major consequences for businesses, consumers, and the nation's global standing. This is more than a legal opinion. It's a turning point for U.S. trade policy. The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision found the tariffs under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act unconstitutional. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that while the president has some discretion in national security, that power is not unlimited. The court ruled the link between imported goods and national security was too weak to justify sweeping tariffs. This narrows Section 232, making it much harder for future presidents to impose tariffs unilaterally. The dissent, led by Justice Gorsuch, warned the ruling could limit the executive's ability to respond to real threats. For businesses and consumers, the outcome is clear. The legal basis for the tariffs is gone. The government must now unwind these complex import taxes and process refunds. Congress and the administration must decide what, if anything, will replace the dismantled tariff regime. The legal fight centered on Section 232, a Cold War-era law meant for rare cases where imports threatened national security. The Trump administration's broad use of Section 232 in 2018 was unprecedented, targeting allies and sparking legal challenges. Plaintiffs argued that economic competition from allies was not a national security threat, and even the Pentagon said military needs were a small fraction of production. The Supreme Court agreed, ruling the law did not give the president a blank check for tariffs. The case also raised the non-delegation doctrine. Congress cannot hand its legislative powers to the executive. The court sidestepped the constitutional question, instead clarifying that Congress never granted such sweeping power. This precedent reins in executive authority and requires any future use of national security for trade restrictions to meet a much higher legal standard. The judiciary's role as a check on executive power is reaffirmed. Financial markets responded instantly. Stocks for automakers and manufacturers soared, while U.S. steel and aluminum producers tumbled. Investors welcomed the end of tariffs, expecting lower costs and higher profits for many industries. The political response was sharply divided. The current administration called it a win for consumers and a return to sensible trade policy. Congressional leaders promised a new trade framework, while Trump and his allies condemned the ruling as a betrayal of American workers. Supporters of the tariffs warned of job losses and a flood of cheap imports. The decision ensures trade policy will remain a flashpoint in American politics. The winners and losers are clear, but the debate is far from over. For consumers, the ruling promises relief. Tariffs had raised prices on everything from cars to canned goods. Economists expect gradual price drops as supply chains adjust, easing inflation for families. Manufacturers that use steel and aluminum, like automakers and builders, will see lower costs and greater competitiveness. For domestic steel and aluminum producers, the decision is a blow. ending years of protection and raising fears of layoffs. Many smaller manufacturers caught in the middle will benefit from cheaper materials and improved margins. The ruling highlights the complex, often conflicting interests within American manufacturing. A policy that helped one sector hurt another. Now, the balance shifts again. The impact will ripple through the entire industrial ecosystem. The Supreme Court's decision drew swift praise from U.S. allies in the EU, Canada, and Mexico, who had faced the tariffs and retaliated in kind. These countries are now preparing to lift their own tariffs, a relief for American exporters who lost market share abroad. The end of the tariff war is expected to restore trust and cooperation with key partners. China's response was more reserved, as the ruling doesn't affect separate tariffs targeting Chinese goods. Still, Beijing reiterated its opposition to unilateral U.S. tariffs. Internationally, the decision is seen as a win for the rules-based trading system. Legal experts say it signals that domestic courts can check executive overreach, discouraging similar moves worldwide. The ruling could help restore faith in global trade norms. America's trading partners are watching closely as the U.S. redefines its approach. Economists project that removing the tariffs will boost U.S. GDP modestly, driven by lower business costs and stronger consumer spending. Job gains in manufacturing and services are expected to outweigh losses in the metals sector. Studies show the tariffs' costs were mostly passed to American consumers and importers, while retaliatory tariffs hurt U.S. exporters, especially farmers. Some experts argue the tariffs did help revive domestic steel and aluminum, providing jobs in struggling regions, but the benefits were concentrated, while the costs were widespread. The ruling returns trade policy to Congress, creating a policy vacuum. Lawmakers now face the challenge of crafting a new, balanced approach that protects industries, lowers costs, and maintains alliances. The era of using national security as a catch-all for tariffs is over. The next steps will shape America's economic future. The 2018 tariffs were part of a long evolution in U.S. trade policy. For decades, America championed free trade, creating the WTO and NAFTA. But rising concerns about job losses and China's rise fueled a shift toward protectionism. Previous presidents used tariffs, but the Trump administration's use of Section 232 for broad economic protectionism was unprecedented. This Supreme Court ruling now joins landmark cases that define the limits of presidential power in trade. It echoes past decisions that checked executive authority, even in the name of national security. Globally, the ruling is seen as a counter-signal to the recent wave of protectionism. It suggests a possible return to a more integrated, rules-based global economy. Yet, the political tensions that fueled protectionism remain unresolved. The Supreme Court's decision to strike down the tariffs is a pivotal moment for U.S. trade. The ruling limits presidential power, hands trade policy back to Congress, and has already shifted markets and global alliances. For consumers and most manufacturers, it promises lower costs. For steel and aluminum communities, it brings new challenges. The decision dismantles a policy that defined the last decade and forces a national debate on what comes next. Lawmakers must now build a new framework, one that addresses unfair competition, supports key industries, and strengthens alliances. The era of unilateral, security-justified tariffs is over. The data shows both the costs and benefits of the old approach. The question now: how will Washington write the next chapter of American trade? The world is watching as the U.S. redefines its economic future.